Hi everyone. This is actually a review of this novel. This fantasy novel is actually considered very canonical in the basically canon of Arthurian literature and also fantasy literature. This is actually a novel I read quite a number of times. I would say probably around 2 or 3 times, at least 2 times, yes. And it's written by the late Marion Zimmer Bradley. In this particular video, since I have a bit of a time recording on my phone, I just want to go on to certain things about the controversy that surrounds this novel and the author herself, and how this has kind of affected the reception of the novel. So I believe that for those who are actually majoring in English literature in college and in university, you all might actually recall that during your time in college, or even right now, when you are actually doing the courses in fantasy literature, Arthurian, Arthurian fantasy and Arthurian literature, especially in the contemporary period. So this Marion Zimmer Bradley has been very much prescribed as like a canonical author, writer that you have to study or to read somewhere along the line, in those few years of your college degree or career. Um I mean, for me myself, I mean, as a medievalist, someone who specialized in medieval literature and also medievalism, how it has actually affected our modern day receptions of the Middle Ages, okay, how it's being received and also rewritten. I actually came across this novel pretty incidentally because I was actually delving into the area of basically modern reconstructionist neo-paganism, and how like this feminist strain of Wicca or even neo-paganism has actually shaped or inform the writing of the novel itself. As you all know, might also know that the late Marion Zimmer Bradley has actually influenced many other female, okay, not necessarily feminists, but female writers and female authors, including Diana Paxson, 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 L. Paxson, yeah, who has actually collaborated with her on some novels, or actually finished some novels that Marion Zimmer Bradley did not manage to finish in her lifetime. So I would believe that the was that the Ancestors of Avalon, and yeah, the novel The Ancestors of Avalon, Lady of also was it Lady of Avalon or Princess? Yeah, Princess of Avalon. Yeah, um, they were actually co-authored by both Zimmer Bradley and Paxson. Yes, so she's very canonical. I mean, Marion Zimmer Bradley is very much canonical as an author. But let's go on to certain things about this the author's life, which has kind of shaped our own understanding of this particular novel. As I've said, there was a controversy that broke out in the year 2014. So for those who are not aware, okay, she was Mary Zimmer Bradley was obviously involved in the neo-pagan reconstructionist movement. It's a reconstructionist movement because modern neo-paganism or modern Wicca, regardless of the coven or the group, the witchcraft, the group of witchcraft practitioners who exist. A lot of these movements are very much reconstructionist in the aftermath of, let's say, modern feminism, the resurgence of interest in how, like how the New Age movement, and not just New Age movement, but even pagan movement, can serve as alternatives to the traditional Judeo-Christian kind of spirituality in which believes in the monotheistic God of the Bible. So it's a very reactionary and also very reconstructionist movement, because obviously we know that in this, this predominantly goddess oriented culture, um, there was also the projection of this whole idea of a more, I would say, liberating or even permissive sexuality, uh, not just feminine sexuality, but even possibly, I would say, the elements of masculine sexuality, which are much more experimental or even queer. And you see parts of this being reflected in the novels, the expanse of the novel, the how he actually depicted the characters. So I would say that from my point of view, of course, no one is saying that Marion Zimmer Bradley is very much a bad writer. She is a very good writer in terms of the nuanced style of writing, the way she's able to actually, command the readers in the attention. Although this novel stands at 869, yeah, around it's a whopping 869 pages or 870. Yeah, it's really really thick. So you probably will have will expect to finish this maybe in about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending on your reading speed. And for me, I finished this in about 1 week. Actually, I was really fast. I must admit, when I read it for the first time, it was my like school holidays. I finished reading it, and then this is the second copy that I bought after I sold off my old copy. But somehow I got it back, and the thing is this: it doesn't matter. Okay, I got this back, and for $10, yeah. And the thing about this, the controversy has to do with it broke out in, actually, let me see, the controversy broke out in 2014 when Marion Zimmer Bradley's own biological daughter, Moira Graylan, okay, actually from basically the daughter from her second marriage to Walter Breen, was one of the foremost numismatic. Basically, he studies the numismatic, meaning that he studies the history of coins, all this stuff. He was one of actually the most foremost numismatic scholars and researchers in American history. When the daughter came forth, okay, Moira Graylan, she accused. It was posthumous too, because at that point I think Marion Zimmer Bradley had already passed away, and she made certain accusations of what her parents had done to her. Basically, she stated, okay, that since the 1980s, basically, yeah, in the 1980s, she had actually reported Walter Breen to the police for actually abusing her brother. Okay, and she also claimed that Marion Zimmer Bradley had actually abused and also assaulted her, yeah, okay, as the mother, okay, since she was 3 years old. So these are very damning accusations, as we know. And because of the nature of these accusations, we know that there's no way that it can be verified because of Marion Zimmer Bradley's death. But at the same time, we cannot just dismiss it, because Walter Breen was actually a convicted pedophile. So yes, he was a convicted child molester or abuser, and he, as supposedly according to the testimony of Moira Graylan, okay, he was just actually arrested and tried for various crimes pertaining to the abuse of young children, okay, who were not actually his biologically. And this was being abetted by Marion Zimmer Bradley. So in understanding this particular history or piece of biographical detail of the author, it is in the light of these details that we can't understand that where all this, the permissive sexuality of the novel comes about. So this novel is actually, because it's such a thick, I would call it a magnum opus in itself, which traces the beginnings of the Arthurian court, basically from, let's say, Uther Pendragon and the his marriage of Igraine, who's actually the originally the wife of Goloa, okay, Gorlois, okay, and also how it begins from that, okay, and then from there it moves on to this whole thing with the subsequent coronation of the child, okay, Arthur, who grew up together with his sister Morgan Le Fay, his half sister, yeah, who is actually called Morgaine, not Morgan, but Morgaine, okay, and how Morgaine at the same time also grew up with certain exposure to Lancelot, who's actually called Lancelot, and also Galahad. He's also called Galahad, according to his other name, by Avalon. So you get a certain sense of this thing, like a triangulated relationship between Morgaine, um, Lancelot, and then later on Arthur, whom uh, Morgaine has to sleep with under the mating ritual between the horn god and the goddess. Yes, there's always permutations of the mating ritual, which later get repeated again with regards to the son. Okay, Mordred, who was actually I think he was called Elf's Arrow or something like that, but he also means evil counsel, and he sleeps with I think Nineveh. Yeah, Nineveh, one of the other ladies of the lake. So in the backdrop of this, and then going all the way into this, there's also the obviously the famous adulterous affair between Lancelot, or the Lancelot here in this novel, and Guinevere. Guinevere, who's called Gwenhwyfar. Okay, she's called according to her Welsh name. Okay, and so you get a lot of this different there are multiple triangulations and duos and pairs which crisscross, and of course you also have Lancelot and Elaine, okay, the fair maid of Astolat, whom in Mallory's Maud Arthur, she supposedly died, and not just that, but I think even in Alfred Lord Tennyson's Idylls of the King, she dies of a broken heart, and then basically rejected by Lancelot, or Lancelot here. But down here, no, she's actually given in marriage to Lancelot by virtue of Morgaine's magic. Okay, basically there's a very strong emphasis on the aspect of sex magic, sex magic, and the whole idea of fertility, giving yourself to the land, and also giving yourself to the gods, the pagan gods, basically. So this is a very different take on the whole idea of Arthur, that he owes his service, okay, to the island of Avalon, okay, where the high priestesses reside, and he's to actually honor the service of the goddess. Okay, this goddess is actually a threefold goddess of the maiden, the mother, and the old hag, the crone. Okay, the aged crone. So basically it mirrors certain like Indo-European tripartite divisions of female goddesses, such as the Morrigu, the Irish Morrigu, who appears in the battlefield in terms of like maybe a trio or like crows and everything. So, but with three faces. Okay, this Indo-European permutations always exist. In the case of this Miss Avalon, is actually very much I would say that it's not given in a real name, so it's a very generic threefold goddess manifestation. So this is a relatively interesting novel if you were to but of course you cannot just look past the one thing that I found after knowing about this case of the sexual exploitation that Moira Grayland was talking about. It kind of makes you realize, actually, there is I mean, as much as you cannot really cancel the academy, the academic community has not really cancelled Marion Zimmer Bradley. So we are still pretty much studying her novel because of the complexity of her writing, the the really rich, nuanced storytelling and imagery, and as well as the very layered narratives and motifs. But at the same time, you cannot divorce it from its very highly problematic relationships. Okay, so this is one thing. Once you start on the first 100 pages, which begins with the marriage of basically Igraine to Golwa, we really get a sense of this because Golwa was married. He's the Christian duke or count. Yes, the Christian duke. But at the same time, under the law of Avalon, okay, which is a law unto itself, as opposed to the Christian court, okay. Basically, the lady of the lake, Vivian, who's a half sister or sister, yeah, she's a sister to Igraine. She tells Igraine that she has to give herself to Uther Pendragon, okay, under the laws of the Isle of Avalon. And we really get a sense that like Igraine, the early part is where Igraine resists it, saying, no, I'm not a whore, please don't pimp me out to another man when I'm really married. I plan to give to continue trying to give birth to a son for him. But of course, as prophesied, okay, prophecy is not just the domain of the Christian priest, but not really. It's actually the prophecy of the priestesses of the goddess, okay, the threefold goddess in here in the novel. So according to the prophecy of Vivian, you get the sense that we really get the sense from the first 100 pages that unless she gives herself to Uther, she will never ever see another son, okay, another son or another son coming. So in the end, obviously there's a certain aspect of romanticization of all these exploitative relationships, because you have this particular moments when you have flashbacks which are similar to past life. Yeah, they're past life our body experiences, where Igraine Uther seems to have like kind of like astral projected in some ways into like their existence at like thousands of years ago to this civilization on the island of Atlantis, which sank under the sea. So this is something very interesting, because that in the New Age religions, there's this very interestingly unverified belief that at least in some of them, okay, that we are all reincarnated. At least the more aware ones, we are reincarnated from the priestesses or the warriors of this, or even the intelligentsia of the spiritual intelligentsia of the island of Atlantis. So we go back a long way, and there's this attempt to sort of romanticize that relationship between Uther and Igraine by positing or asserting that through that out of body experience that they had, that they were both priests of the Isle of Avalon, not Avalon, Isle of Atlantis, and they were in love, like they were lovers, like goodness, thousands and thousands of millennia ago. So before Atlantis fell. So you have to get this sense of the whole Atlantis thing. But of course, this thing, once you go past that narrative, it sort of like dwindles, and then the whole thing becomes focused on the whole mating ritual between Arthur and Morgaine, and the whole recognition, which kind of like becomes very tragic, because Arthur was kind of besotted with Morgaine even after he actually realizes that she's his half sister. But for Morgaine, she's like, I need to escape this. I'm getting pregnant with his child. So is he even this child of mine? Is it his son, or is he the nephew in that sense? So you get a sense of that the whole is a very tortured thing, where she tries to consider taking herbs to abort the baby, but doesn't end up doing it, and she wanders into fairyland. Interspersed in between these moments, there are always all these little moments where, okay, from the Atlantis scene, you have Morgaine, okay, entering fairyland. Fairyland is like a liminal area where things get disrupted. So she actually gets into fairyland at least twice. Okay, the first time she meets the fairy who convinces her to try to leave her son there with them, but she refuses, goes back, gives birth, and gives that son over Mordred over to Morgause, okay, who's her aunt, to do all these different things, like to take care of him and everything. But of course, which leads to him being an antagonist to Arthur under Morgause's manipulations. And then you have like the whole idea. Okay, the second round when she gets into Fairyland again, when she's way older, she does certain things, including mating with one of the ferrymen, and but even in that second kind of like a second a part two of this novel, there's always this implication. Of course, there are multiple permutations of different relationships. Morgane has not fully, she has kind of like, fully accepted that, she can have Lancelot. Lancelot is actually in love with Gui Mifa, who's Guinevere, okay, but at the same time, she understands that she has to distance herself from basically Arthur, to so that, as a half sister, incest is highly frowned upon by the Christian court, and the idea that she gave birth to his son, despite all the it being just gossip, could have ruined Arthur's sovereignty. So she ends up doing some things like trying to help Guinevere to give birth, to spite Arthur's libido or sexual appetite for Guinevere. So this part is kind of like I find it relatively, it's a bit boring, but at the same time you get a sense of the contrast between her and Guinevere. Okay, the thing with her second lapse or entry into Fairylands, where things start becoming a bit more complicated, because one day in Fairyland can be like years and years in the real world. Okay, at least in the real world of the Camelot and the court. So that leads to certain complications where she's gone for years, and by the time that happens, various people grow up, including her son. Okay, and yeah, the different people like Gawain, there are different characters. It can get a bit overwhelming, but by the time you reach the third act, which is basically when it comes into the part where there's a half brother, half sibling, Sir Malegon, who actually abducts Guinevere, and then basically he assaults her, does unimaginable acts, although he claims to be a half sibling to Guinevere, and which leads to Guinevere having some kind of a, I won't call it a revenge sex, but it's like a comfort sex with Lancelot, who actually rescues her, which again becomes the complicated thing, because we know that at this point, the relationship between Arthur and Guinevere and also Lancelot, there is already an established triangular relationship. But the thing is that because of all that we know of the based on Moira Grayland, that means Zimmer Bradley's daughter, and what she outed, okay, about her mother and her father, okay, it seems that there's a lot of this whole thing with the permissive sexuality. So obviously, when we read this novel, we get a sense that it's really, really permissive. The whole idea of Lancelot, his depiction is not just he's not a straightforward character, because he's depicted as a very bisexual man, because the thing that, okay, he is in love with Guinevere, but in a way, when he is in love with Guinevere, he is in love with her because through her he gets access to Arthur. So in a way, he is in love with Arthur. The novel leaves it pretty unambiguous. In a way, it was like maybe he's really in love with Arthur. He's not really in love with Guinevere totally. So but because of that, that scene of like comfort sex where he becomes intimate with her after she gets assaulted by Sir Malegon, okay, who's a so-called half brother again. The whole thing about all this this crisscrossing relationships, the triangular relationships, the sexual experimentativeness, experimentation or experimentative sexuality of all these different characters, including Lancelot especially, okay, who's also called Galahad, before he actually has a son who's also called Galahad. via Elaine. Okay, so this whole thing becomes a bit of a, yeah, it becomes very disturbing from my point of view if you were to look further. So, but I mean, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing or good thing, because from a literary point of view, I mean, a nuanced appreciation of this novel is required, but we definitely understand it better as simply, this is very much informed by Marion Zimmer Bradley's own permissive sexuality. So of course, then you have the part where after um, after Morgane returns from Fairyland again, and she gets more like active in the participation within the courts. She uh, basically befriends Avalon, who is actually a knight, or who's also a son of her husband to be King Uriens, whom she actually castrates the death of. So there's this again this thing. She's married to Urien, King of North Wales, but at the same time, she's really in love with Avalon, the son, who has all these tattoos, which were basically given to him as a warrior, priest, guardian of Avalon. So you get another kind of relationship, you get another triangular relationship, and at this point, I guess that you are kind of like really, we are not left in any doubt that basically Morgan is now like shifting from the. I mean, she has basically throughout the whole novel, we don't get a very villain portrayal of or depiction of Morgan as a person. This is very much different from, let's say, the standard medieval text. Yeah, depiction of Morgan as someone who's like, she's a witch, she's the bit. I mean, yeah, the bitch in a way, because she tries to kill her half brother all the time. But down here, we know that okay, she's in love with her brother in a way. Yeah, she's a kind of lover, although she tries to distance herself from all this courtly rivalry and gossip. And then but now later on as time goes on, she realized we had to make Arthur accountable because he has forsaken Avalon, the pagans. Okay, he has forsaken the goddess, and he decides to turn to the Christian God. And then that means Christ. And he has also like taken on the banner with the Virgin Mary in a way to actually like to basically humor his wife, okay, who's a very devout Christian. So it's a very very complex thing, okay, which goes down to the final thing. The final tragedy comes from basically not Avalon trying to steal the sword and to the scabbard to actually kill Arthur and to get on the throne, okay, to be on Avalon's side, but it begins when actually Mordred actually enters Avalon in training and enters, and with Nineveh he actually undertakes the mating ritual. So there is a lot of very experimentative views of sexuality that is very much classic to neo-paganism, okay, and I think this will have to be actually taken into consideration when we read this novel, okay. And I'm not going to really give away the whole plot, what happens, but this thing aside, there's a very central theme in the novel itself, which is the conflict between Christianity, basically the Orthodox Catholic variant of Christianity. Okay, Mary Zimmer Bradley is quite an interesting person because not only was she involved in the covenant, but she was also ordained as I think, a clergy in a very non-traditional Catholic kind of Catholic order, but obviously to be married and to be a clergy of that non-traditional Catholic order. Uh, it's a very interesting thing. It's just like it's very almost syncretistic. So basically, Catholicism and paganism are not seen to be conflicting in each other, unlike what we see. Okay, there are certain allusions to Saint Patrick who drove out the snakes. The snakes are not literal snakes in Ireland, but they could refer to probably the old religion. And in this case, that he was actually mentioned in this novel, not as Patrick but as Patricius. Yeah, Patricius. Basically, that's the Latin or Roman version of Patrick. So there are all these very, very exact allusions, And I don't think that Marion Zimmer Bradley is very shy or very, she doesn't steer clear from all these historical allusions. But one thing to think of, this is not meant to be a historical novel. So I mean, there are certain allusions to certain things, such as, when they refer to this whole thing about needing a so-called character or man who is like Constantine, because just as Constantine rode under the banner of the cross at Milvian Bridge, and then he won the battle. So in a way, they say that they needed someone like in the person of Arthur, they needed someone who can be a king to England or to Britain, and who could lead the various tribes, including not just the Christian kings and dukes, but even the let's say the pagan peoples, okay, of Britain. So yeah, and all these things. So obviously there are all this allusion. There's allusion to the heretic symbol of the red dragon, which obviously was seen by Gwenfire as a pagan symbol, but it was at the same time a very Welsh uh, symbol that unified the, I think, the northern people, the Scots, yeah, the Scots, the Picts, Picts, okay, and the different tribes, okay, including the fairy people, okay, who were not the fairy people, but the pagan tribes who were shorter, who were darker, okay, from the south. Okay, so I think they were referring to the Welsh people. So the whole backdrop of the conflict between Christianity and paganism obviously looms large, but at the very end, towards the very end, you get a sense after all these multiple conflicts and everything, all the machinations of these characters, including the priestesses of Avalon, the priest, warrior priests, including Avalon and Mordred. You get that no matter what is being done, and even despite all these different things, like including Morgane's own machinations of power, where she ends up killing her own husband magically by something, by weaving actually at the loom, which is again a very very, I would say, a very pagan symbol of, like, like we weave someone's fate and destiny. You get a sense that despite all this, all these machinations, all this magic, all this power, ultimately the goddess has her own way of reappearing again. And the very ending of the novel is one where it was implied that Bridget was Saint Bridget, okay, and a saint, a Christian saint, was a manifestation, in her earlier manifestation, she was actually a goddess, a fertility goddess of Ireland, or of Britain. So this whole thing actually kind of from the whole thing of this versus that, basically Christianity versus paganism, or vice versa, um, it moves on to this whole thing where, let's say, when faced with the threat of dying out, paganism doesn't just die out itself. Instead, it assimilates elements, reappears in certain Christianized forms, and the goddess has her own way of reappearing. So the whole syncretism, or the syncretistic vision of the novel, comes across at the very end. And okay, this is one last thing before I end. Okay, I thought that the experimentative sexuality, the conflict of religion aside, which are the two things which I covered in my the semester before last semester, yeah, that was last year. um, One particular technique which kind of stands out and which makes this novel relatively interesting and complex is that framing device through the perspective of Morgane. Because very very rarely, I think it's probably why this novel was regarded as a very a pioneer text in feminist fantasy, is that this novel itself tells the story through the perspective of Morgane. Okay, it's framed through her perspectives a lot. During certain times, you get a shift into the certain characters' perspectives, such as, for example, I would say you see the perspective of Vivian, um, Morgause, okay, different women. Basically, it's about the women behind the throne, okay. There's no real Game of Thrones per se. I mean, of course, some of the women want to control the men and everything, and but you get many faces of different women, and but the main framing narrative is still ultimately the perspective of Morgane, okay, or Morgan Le Fay as we know her. And traditionally, we all know that she was regarded as a villain in the Arthurian legends, because she seduced Arthur, according to um, some versions, or at least she use magic. Okay, at least in the version of Mallory in Maud Arthur, Morgaine was the one who actually took away Arthur's sword, the scabbard, okay, and disappeared, and she learned all those different magical arts. She was very deeply opposed to Arthur's rule, okay. Morgause was the one who actually had a child, okay, Mordred, with Arthur, okay, the others, which led to him basically trying to yeah kill the babies, like Herod's slaughter of the innocents. So I mean, already we have this very pretty disposition towards seeing Morgaine or Morgan as the villainous, but in this novel itself, you get a sense, because of the framing device, that Marion Zimmer Bradley is trying to redeem her. She's trying to sort of like, oh, say, this is the way that history saw me, Morgan Le Fay, but this is not the way it was. Okay, so she's rewriting the history. It's a very anachronistic adaptation of the Arthurian canon that you get. Okay, so anyway, these are the 3 points that I actually covered so far, and I'm actually just going to turn in for the night. And so have a good one, everyone. Also, if there's anything else you would like me to cover concerning this novel, or even regarding fantasy, and also even Zimmer Bradley herself, okay, you feel free to let me know in the comments. And I've actually read quite a number of her novels, and I plan to actually go on to reading Priestess of Avalon and maybe Ancestors of Avalon, which was actually being the latter one, which was probably co-authored or completed by Diana Paxson, because before actually before she could finish it, obviously she passed away, and then Diana Paxson became her kind of a legacy writer. Yeah, the one who actually wrote for the rest of the things. So yeah, so Princess of Avalon will be quite interesting, because it's about Queen Helena. Okay, we know Queen Helena is a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church, and also even in the Roman Catholic Church, because she was credited with the discovery of the true cross, where Jesus Christ hung on, okay, during his crucifixion. But at the same time, Zimmer Bradley depicts her differently. Okay, so yeah. So anyway, I'm gonna turn you for night. Okay, have a good one, everyone. Okay, bye bye.